That is the debate on Cambodia, notably the case of Kem Sokha. As usual, we will start with the authors of the resolution. The first to take the floor is Mark Demesmaeker. 1 minute.
Mr. President, allow me to begin by welcoming the Cambodian delegation with the opposition leader from Cambodia, Sam Rainsy, who is sitting here today in the Visitors Gallery. So a warm welcome to you. If you want to know a person's character, you should give him power. Abraham Lincoln already said that a long time ago. And we have got to know the Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen. Longer in office than any other Prime Minister in the world, this Premier is so power-hungry that he is using every possible means to stay in power for another 10 years. And in order to achieve that, he pushes aside anybody who stands in his way, as it's the case of Kem Sokha, the former chairman of the biggest opposition party, the CNRP. That party was, of course, conveniently dissolved just in time for the elections. Democracy is being stifled. The government lacks any kind of legitimacy, and international criticism against it has not achieved anything. There is a Flemish expression which says that if you can't hear, you have to feel. It is high time that the government should feel that things are getting serious. It is high time for sanctions, visa sanctions, trade sanctions. I don't see any reason to wait any longer.
Thank you very much. Madam Lochbihler has the floor.
Thank you, President, and I'd like to thank you, Mrs. Mogherini, for your statement, which I think is something that we can all support. Now, moving on to Cambodia, the elections were neither free nor fair and have led the country into becoming a one-party autocratic state. The price was high for that. The opposition party was dissolved and many politicians were imprisoned. Kem Sokha, the opposition leader, and other opposition leaders were imprisoned, as I said, and I think that we need dialogue between the government and the opposition rather than oppression. In addition, human rights organisations need to be listened to too. You have the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and there is an agreement there which runs out in December and needs to be renewed. We welcome the fact that the government has provided damages for some families who have lost land in the country. That's one thing we can welcome, but it's not something that's systematically happening, and those kinds of agreements need to be extended. Now, sugar licensing needs to be looked at because that also relates to these land conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please respect the time limits. We have to conclude this before the presentation by our official guests. Now the floor goes to Mr. Weidenhauser.
Thank you, President. Cambodia's recent history has been marked by terrible crimes. The Khmer Rouge murdered thousands, and the after effects of that are visible everywhere. Democratic normality, that was the purpose of the transition. Economic development took place, people became involved in politics, and this caused disquiet in Hun Sen's government. NGOs, opposition politicians bore the brunt of this, with people being arrested or choosing exile. And it's a pleasure to see their representatives upstairs in the visitors' gallery. When it comes to the election observation, the Parliament refused to go in order not to legitimise the election process. And we have got to use deadlines and be robust. In economic terms, there are many ways where we have leverage, as you can see in our resolutions, and we owe that to the people of this hard-put country.
Thank you very much. The floor goes to Marie-Christine Vergiat.
Thank you, Mr. President. The general elections last July were, as we feared, one that led to all the seats being held by the same party. This is a setback to democracy in this country. De facto, a single party, repression of expression of opinion, repression of the opposition. The case of Kem Sokha, released after 1 year's imprisonment, well, it's good that he's released, even though his freedom is extremely limited, and there are still a large number of political prisoners languishing in prison and suffering intimidation. But I want to stress the situation of trade unionists, and people are fighting against the land grabbing going to the sugar industry. Large numbers of people are being displaced for the profit of leading industrialists. Human rights are inviolable, indivisible, and I would like to have your opinion, High Commissioner, on this particular issue.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zdechowski is the next speaker.
Thank you very much, President. I'm extremely pleased that we were able to prepare a very good compromise. However, we have already adopted a very similar text back in September 2017, December 2017, and what are the concrete results? Zero. Ladies and gentlemen, the situation in Cambodia has not improved at all. Far from it. The crisis has been escalated. That's why I'm extremely happy that we have decided to impose a more restrictive text. That's why we are calling upon the Commission to come to specific conclusions concerning the situation in Cambodia, to make a list of people who will have a visa ban to travel to the European Union, to send a very clear signal to Member States to deal clearly with this unacceptable situation. We are adopting one declaration after another, and the situation is simply becoming worse and worse. This is unacceptable. That is why all of us have to cooperate. The Commission, High Representative, all European institutions, we should call upon the local government to cooperate with us. The European Union has to use all our tools available in order to improve the situation in Cambodia and to resolve it. Thank you.
Mr. Petras Austerlitz is the next speaker.
Mr. Chair, Madam High Representative, first of all, I want to welcome Sam Rainsy and his delegation in this hall and appreciate their uncompromised fight for the democratic future of Cambodia. Those people really deserve all kinds of support of us and the free world in general. Despite the recent releases of the few political prisoners, including Kem Sokha, the situation in Cambodia deteriorates further. Elections in July was nothing else but a farce. All the seats of the ruling party to the ruling party. What do they say about this? They appreciate, they like it. They call it elections. There cannot be another scenario from our side. We must firmly demand the Cambodian government to give back the voice and the rights to its people. We must put an end to impunity. To achieve this, the European Union has to finally move from statements to actions. Cambodia cannot further benefit from GSP plus trade preferences. Those responsible, Mr. Chair, must be identified and punished by travel ban to Europe and by freezing their assets. Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the EPP, the floor goes to Mr. Shogor.
Although the 23-year-long rule of the Cambodian People's Party has led to significant economic development in Cambodia, recent trends in the country's political development are extremely worrying. The entrenchment of the CCP's political dominance over the past few years have led to serious concerns for democracy. the last elections are very instructive in this regard, being widely considered by foreign observers as an undemocratic charade. And there are plenty of other concerns too. The arrest and detention of Kem Sokha is just the latest in the series of crackdowns on political and other human rights. If the country's government does not step back from dismantling democratic rights, the EU is well advised to launch an investigation under the mechanism provided for in the framework of the Everything But Arms Agreement, and to consider reviewing the trade preferences Cambodia enjoys. Thanks.
Thank you. Julie Ward is the next speaker.
I was very happy to hear about the release of Kem Sokha. For us to know that a political prisoner is out of arbitrary detention is always a relief. Although this development is positive, the situation in Cambodia is still extremely serious, given the gross disregard of its international human rights obligations and the serious attacks on democracy, namely the complete silencing of political opposition, along with a broader climate of shrinking space for civil society. I am particularly worried by the situation of human rights defenders, especially in light of the charges against 5 members of the Cambodian Human Rights and Development Association. As Europeans, we must always be aware of the violations conducted by our own companies in Cambodia. Attacks against indigenous peoples, including land grabbing, affects many communities. It's our responsibility to develop a trade policy that prevents corporations from harming these less developed countries and fragile states. Following the EU's decision to suspend direct budget support to Cambodia, I wish to remind this House and the EU in general of the importance of dialogue and people-to-people contact in these contexts. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker for the Liberals group is Ramon Tremosa i Barcels.
Moltes gràcies, senyor president. Madam Mogherini, dear colleagues, I welcome this new strong resolution against Prime Minister Hun Sen. His government repeated actions and violations of basic democratic principles. I want to welcome Sam Rainsy, a friend and a great leader that does not give up in his struggle for more justice and democracy for the Cambodian people. The last July elections in Cambodia were farce elections. The party of Hun Sen in power since 33 years now obtained 100% of all contested seats in National Assembly and the Senate. The opposition was banned and declared illegal. The government of Hun Sen is illegitimate, and I would like the EU and Ms Mogherini to recognize and acknowledge this fact. The EU gives a lot of money to Cambodia, and we cannot continue doing business as usual. Cambodia benefits from the most favorable regime available under the US Generalized Scheme of Preferences. Under Article 19 of this regulation, in case of serious human rights and labour rights violations, the EU should suspend the preferential tariffs temporarily. If the EU wants to save its credibility, we cannot do business as usual. I call the Commission to publish immediately the conclusions of the last EU fact-finding missions, and I invite the Commission to report as soon as possible to the Parliament of these conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Angelo Ciocca for the ENF.
Circa 40 giorni fa sono...
Around 40 days ago, I was in Cambodia and I documented and criticised a complete lack of human rights in that country. Europe's reflecting on the problems in Cambodia and is mourning what's happening, but actually we've been an accomplice to what's going on. If we really want to look at the problems in Southeast Asia, we have to do away with the agreements that we have with that region. For example, everything but arms. That hasn't given the Cambodian people anything at all. Quite the opposite. It's seriously damaged our countries and our agriculture. We need to stop those agreements. We need to prevent Cambodians being oppressed. We need to also protect our own products. I think this is something that should make us think 64 years is the average life expectancy in Cambodia. We shouldn't be importing that kind of desperation into Europe. We shouldn't be importing these problems into Italy. These problems, if we're going to deal with them, should be dealt with in Cambodia. Let me conclude, though, with a very quick appeal. I'm turning to those who do not have human rights. I'm talking about Nonno Mariano, a 92-year-old grandfather in Italy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let us move to the Catch the Eye procedure. The first speaker, Krzysztof Hetman. Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, recent events in Cambodia, the elections in the first place, where the ruling party won 100% seats and dissolving opposition party, this shows clearly that the truth about this country is very sad. We can no longer consider it to be a democratic state. Therefore, I think it is not enough just to call an appeal to the Cambodian government so that they follow rule of law and democracy. In order to protect the Cambodian nations from the authoritarian government and breaking human rights, we need to act more decisively. Therefore, I fully support the decision to stop our assistance for the elections. We should also reconsider withdrawing trade preferences, and we should impose visa limitations for those responsible for breaking human rights in the country. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for sticking to the time limit. And now the floor goes to Javier Nart.
We are criticizing fraudulent elections and human rights violations. In Cambodia, the Prime Minister, the President of Cambodia, Hun Sen, is a former military commander who is involved in crimes, and then we have further people who are causing problems. Now, these are people who say that they belong to the centre of politics, and so does the European People's Party, the EPP, and the first thing that the EPP should be doing, rather than criticising, should be expelling that party with that terrible president from the International EPP Association. Now, we've got these fraudulent elections, they're unacceptable, but what we have to do is suspend all assistance to Cambodia that doesn't go through credible international organisations. Anything else is just nonsense.
Thank you very much indeed. And Fabio Massimo Castaldo is the next speaker.
Thank you, President. Last 10th of September, Kem Sokha was released, leader of the Cambodian opposition, who had been accused of treason and been put behind bars arbitrarily for more than a year. Activists, journalists have been cracked down on by Hun Sen, determined to increase his 33 years in power. There is apparently, it seems a democracy, it's actually a kleptocracy. And the last elections were a farce, taking away any vestige of democracy. We must suspend immediately any form of aid which is not guaranteed by international organisations, and take a decision to be firm with the regime, because it still has advantageous economic relationships with us at a time when human rights are a dream and democracy is very difficult for ordinary Cambodians to see, and what they do remember is the terrible days of the...
Thank you very much. José Ignacio Faria is the next speaker.
Thank
Thank you, Mr. President. High Representative, thank you for the kind words. The opposition party did have support, but his party was prevented from participating in the elections with the result that they were a complete farce. The current Prime Minister won all seats with the sole aim of staying in power as long as possible. High Representative, I've always congratulated you on your good work, but in the case of Cambodia, I have to say that when it comes to Cambodia, the EU was very slow to react to the collapse of democracy in the country. It is high time that we imposed individual sanctions on members of the regime, and we should fight against the erosion of human, civil and political rights in that country.
Ilhan Küçük is the next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Mogherini, dear colleagues. For over 3 decades, Cambodia has been ruled by authoritarian leader Hun Sen. Prime Minister Hun Sen and his party use violence, politically motivated prosecutions and widespread corruption to intimidate and suppress any kind of political opposition. Fear of losing national elections in July 2018 prompted a major crackdown. The primary opposition, Cambodia National Rescue Party, has dissolved by the courts with the leader Sam Rainsy forced into exile and another Kem Sokha jailed. The government restricts independent media and civil society groups through forced closures, threats, intimidation and arbitrary detention. I call on Cambodian authorities to put an end to all forms of harassment, abuse and politically motivated criminal changes of members of the political opposition, human rights defenders, trade unions, labour rights advocates and other civil society activists, and journalists, of course. We need to use our diplomatic tool to protect the fundamental rights of Cambodian people to elect and to be elected, to guarantee pluralism and democratic principles. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final speaker within the Catch the Eye procedure, Ignacio Corral has the floor.
Grazie Presidente. La velocità.
Thank you, President. Well, there's been a massive collapse of democracy and human rights in Cambodia, and it's surprising how quickly that's happened. In just 1 year, the only genuine party of opposition, the Cambodian National Rescue Party, was dissolved, and Kem Sokha, its chairman, was imprisoned on trumped-up charges. I mean, what you've got is the cult of the leader. You've got no tolerance of any kind of opposition. This recalls Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge time, when every single act was aimed at destroying and torturing anyone who was even suspected of not being aligned to the regime. Let's recall that Prime Minister Hun Sen and other high ministers are former Khmer Rouge members. There's not really much of a difference between this regime and the Pol Pot regime. The hunt for dissidents is basically the same. History is repeating itself, and that's the risk we're seeing today. So I would urge the Commission to suspend Cambodia's preferential access to the single market and make it conditional on respect for human and civil rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the debate, and the floor goes to the High Representative Federica Mogherini.
Last year has seen significant steps backwards for Cambodia's fragile democracy. One-party rule, authoritarian tendencies that have gained more ground in the country, and the space for political opposition and civil society has not just shrunk, has simply closed. At the general election in July, following the enforced dissolution of the main opposition party, the ruling party won all seats in the National Assembly. The election took place in a highly restrictive environment, and it was clearly not representative of the democratic will of the Cambodian citizens. Last February, at the European Union Foreign Affairs Council, we stressed that the Cambodian electoral process could not be considered legitimate after the arbitrary exclusion of the main opposition party, and so we suspended the European Union financial assistance to the Cambodian National Election Committee, and we declined to observe the July elections. Over the last year, the legal system has increasingly been used by the authorities in the country to suppress critical voices, not only from the opposition but also from civil society and the media. And at the Foreign Affairs Council in February, we stated that we may consider specific targeted measures if the situation had not improved. So the situation has not improved, and we are now considering the possibility of further measures that, as you know, would require the Council to take a unanimous decision on that. We also recall that respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms, including labour rights, is essential for maintaining EU trade preferences. For this reason, we sent already in July a fact-finding mission to Cambodia to evaluate the situation on the ground, and the decisions on any further steps will be based on the information gathered during this mission. The European Union has been working with and for the people of Cambodia since the end of the war. At first we helped rebuild the country, we helped clear it from landmines and restart fundamental economic activities. Today we support jobs creation and vocational training, and we would like this partnership to continue in order to continue to benefit the people of Cambodia. But it is clear that the Cambodian government must reverse the current trend, otherwise this would not be possible. The recent release on bail of opposition leader Kem Sokha is a positive first step, even though he was released under very restrictive conditions. We now expect the dropping of all charges and the removal of all restrictions placed upon him, and we invite the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition to start a dialogue on the way forward. We urge the Cambodian authorities to drop all remaining politically motivated charges against activists and lift the ban on political activity of 118 senior opposition members. Local councillors from the opposition who were elected in June last year should be reinstated. We also call on the Cambodian government to guarantee the safe return of all exiled opposition politicians, civil society activists and human rights defenders who have fled the country to avoid arrest. The laws and regulations that have been used to restrict opposition and civil society must be reviewed and amended. At the 1991 Paris Peace Accords, the Cambodian government had agreed to a legally binding obligation to maintain a pluralistic and democratic system. So we expect now the Cambodian authorities to restore free political debate and competition and to respect the space for a free and independent civil society. If we continue to see this negative trend without any changes, as I said, we are ready in the Council to take appropriate measures. Thank you.
Thank you, High Representative. We have received 6 draft resolutions at the conclusion of the debate. This debate is now closed. The vote will take place today. Thank you to all those who took part in this debate. Also thanks to our guests in the gallery. I now suspend the sitting until 11:45. Thank you.